Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind carried the sound of a baby crying before Colt Lawson even saw the dust rising from the flats. He reined in his horse, boots kicking up dirt as he dismounted. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the high plains. A hawk circled above, silent. But on the ground, somewhere among the sagebrush, a baby wailed sharp and small and terrified. Colt followed the sound, heart pounding harder the closer he got. Then he saw him. A baby boy, no more than a few months old, lay in the dirt near a torn saddlebag. His tiny fists flailed, face red, mouth open in a cry that clawed through Colt's chest. The child was wrapped in a threadbare blanket, dusty and sun-warmed, but alone. Colt dropped to his knees and scooped the baby into his arms. "There you are," he whispered, voice tight. "You're all right now." The baby quieted the moment he was held. His pale green eyes blinked up at Colt, wet with tears but no new ones falling. His chest heaved with hiccups, but the panic had faded. Colt stood, turning full circle. No wagon, no rider, no sign of a mother. He looked again at the ground, small boot prints, one set, headed west. Fast, staggered. Whoever left the boy here had done it recently, and they had not gone far. Colt settled the baby in the crook of his arm and whistled for his horse. "We'll find her," he muttered. "Someone meant for you to be safe, or they'd have left you for the wolves." He rode slow, scanning the horizon. It was nearly dusk when he spotted a figure collapsed by a cottonwood tree near the creek. A woman, her dress torn at the hem, her arms scraped, her long dark hair full of dust. Colt dismounted and approached on foot. "Ma'am," he called gently. She startled, trying to sit up, then crumpled back to the ground. "I left him," she said, her voice cracked and hoarse. "I thought I could make it to town. I thought someone would find him before." Colt knelt beside her. "He's safe," he said. "I found him, he's with me." Her eyes snapped up. They were the same pale green as the baby's. Her lips trembled. Is he hurt?" "No," Colt said. "Not a scratch. He's strong." A sob burst out of her, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Colt reached out and touched her shoulder. "You are hurt. You need rest. Come with me. My ranch is half a day's ride. I'll get you both there safe." She nodded, too exhausted to argue. He helped her onto his horse, holding the baby tight against his chest. She leaned against him, barely able to stay upright. They rode through the last of the twilight and into the edge of night. When they reached Colt's land, a small spread nestled in a valley near the Gros Ventre River. The moon was high. He lifted the woman down first, then carried the baby inside. The cabin was warm. A fire snapped in the hearth. The scent of pine and leather filled the air. Colt moved quickly, setting the baby gently in a wooden cradle near the hearth, a cradle he had built years ago, though it had never been used. The woman stood in the doorway, watching. "You have a cradle," she whispered. Colt looked at her and for the first time really saw her. Her face was drawn but beautiful. Her eyes held pain and strength in equal measure. "I built it," he said. "Long time ago. Thought I'd be a father once." She stepped forward, her gaze on the baby, now asleep in the cradle. "My name is Lark," she said softly. "Lark Prescott." Colt nodded. "Colt Lawson." She looked up at him. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me," he said. "No one should be left alone out there. Especially not a child." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Colt brought her a blanket and helped her sit near the fire. He poured her water, then went to the small cupboard and cut a slice of bread and dried meat. "Eat," he said. "Then rest. You and your boy are safe here." She took the food with shaking hands. "His name is Porter," Colt smiled. "That's a good name." Lark watched her baby sleep. "His father, he left before Porter was born, said he'd come back, but he never did. I was on my way to Jackson, thought maybe I could find work. But the wagon broke down and the driver took off. I walked all day. I did not want to leave him, but I could not carry him any farther." "You did what you had to," Colt said. She looked at him then, really looked. "Why did you help us?" Colt leaned against the table, arms folded. "I fought in the war, saw too many people left behind. I swore I would not be the kind of man who turned away from someone in need." Lark's voice was quiet. "You are not." They sat in silence after that, the fire popping gently, the baby breathing soft. She fell asleep on the rug near the hearth, curled beneath the blanket, peace finally settling on her face. Colt stayed up, watching them both. Something inside him had shifted the moment he picked up that child. And now, with Lark asleep in his home and Porter dreaming in the cradle, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope, not the kind you speak about. The kind you feel deep in your chest, steady and strong like the beat of a horse's hooves on hard earth. He looked at Lark again. She did not know it yet, but she was not alone anymore. Neither of them were, and he would make sure they never would be again. The rooster crowed before dawn, dragging the first pale light across the windows. Colt had not slept. He sat at the end of the kitchen table, boots off, elbows resting beside a half-empty tin cup of coffee gone cold hours ago. Porter stirred once in the cradle, a tiny grunt escaping him, but settled again. Lark still lay curled on the braided rug, hand flung over her brow, a faint crease between her eyes even in sleep. Colt rose and moved quiet to the door, stepping out into the morning hush. The sky was pale lavender, the mountains holding back the sun for a moment longer. He walked to the corral, unlatched the gate, and let the bay gelding out to graze. The horse nudged his shoulder before moving off, tail flicking. Inside, the cabin floor creaked. Colt turned and saw Lark standing just past the threshold, arms wrapped around herself, her hair uncombed, shadows still under her eyes. "You didn't have to stay up," she said, voice low from sleep. "I didn't mind," Colt answered. "Didn't want you or the boy waking to an empty room." She stepped further in, bare feet soundless on the floorboards. "I should have made it farther yesterday. I thought I could reach the stage stop." "You went farther than most would have. On foot with a child that took more grit than sense, maybe." "But grit all the same." She pulled a shawl off the peg and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I planned on finding work as a seamstress. I've done it before in Cheyenne. There's a boarding house on the edge of Jackson that takes on help for stitching and laundry." "You still mean to go?" Lark looked toward the cradle. "I don't want to stay where I'm not welcome." He crossed his arms, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "Have I made you feel unwelcome?" "No," she said quickly. "Just didn't want to assume anything. This is your home, your life." Colt studied her for a moment. Her voice carried no fear now, but something cautious sat behind her words. "Not suspicion, just the wariness of someone who's been made to start over too many times." "I got a spare room," he said. "Used to be for my brother when he passed through. Ain't been used in years, but the cot's solid. Needs new linens, but I've got those." She hesitated. "That's too kind." "I can pay once I get work." "Not why I offered." She nodded once, eyes steady. "Still, I'd feel better earning my keep." "Then help where you can, that's fair." They stood in silence, the space between them not uncomfortable. The baby stirred again, and Lark moved to him, lifting him with practiced ease. She cradled his head close, rocking side to side without thinking, her cheek resting against his fine hair. "I can start by cleaning up in here," she said. "If you've got a broom and wash basin." Colt pointed to the corner near the hearth. "Basin's there, pumps out back, brooms behind the door." She knelt beside the basin and began tearing strips of old cloth from her skirt's lining, dipping them in water and wringing them out. Colt watched as she worked, her movements efficient, hands steady. She did not complain about the chill or the state of the cabin. Just began to put it in order like it was the most natural thing in the world. He stepped outside again, not because he needed to, but to give her space. His land stretched wide and silent, dotted with cottonwoods and the faint tracks of deer. He'd bought these acres after the war, cleared the brush himself, built the cabin with his own hands. For a long time, it had just been a place to sleep and keep the wind off his back. Now there was a woman inside, and a baby. By noon, the cabin had been swept, the shelves wiped clean, and a small pot of barley soup simmered over the fire. Lark had found the dried herbs in the kitchen box and added them with a sureness that made Colt wonder how long she'd spent looking after herself and others. He returned from chopping wood to find her darning a tear in one of his work shirts. "You didn't have to do that," he said, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "I had the thread out, figured I might as well." He took a seat on the bench near the hearth, stretching his legs out. "You always keep your hands busy." "Idle hands don't do much to keep a body calm," she said without looking up. He nodded slowly. "I used to whittle after the war. Kept me from thinking too hard." What do you think about now? Mostly fence posts and feed bills. She gave a quiet laugh, then looked up. Do you like the quiet out here? I do, he met her eyes, but it's been quieter than I'd like for a long time. She didn't answer that. Just tied off the thread and folded the shirt neatly beside her. By evening, Porter had begun fussing and Lark paced with him, humming something soft under her breath. Colt sat at the table, rolling a thin piece of wood in his fingers, carving out a horse's head with slow, careful strokes. When Lark passed him, she paused and watched. You made toys too? She asked. Sometimes, he said. Didn't have anyone to give them to. She looked down at the carving. You do now. Their eyes met again and something shifted, not sudden, not loud. Just the settling of something long unsettled. That night, Colt laid a new blanket on the cot in the spare room and left the door open in case she needed anything. He checked the latch on the front door, banked the fire, and stood for a long moment in the center of the room, listening to the soft sounds of sleep behind both doors. He'd known loneliness for so long, he'd learned to walk beside it without complaint. But tonight, with the scent of barley still in the air and the hum of another soul moving through his home, the silence felt different, gentler. Like something was beginning. Something honest. He walked to the cradle and looked down at the boy, his small face slack with sleep, fists curled. You've got her grit, he whispered. That'll take you far. From the other room, a floorboard creaked, then stillness again. Colt smiled to himself quietly and settled into his own bed. The wind moved through the eaves, steady and low. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like sorrow. The river ran high that spring, fed by snowmelt from the peaks. It sang over rocks and under fallen branches, louder than it had the week before. Colt stood knee-deep in it, trousers rolled, lifting the line from the water with a quiet grunt. A silver flash twisted in the current, then went still trout, fat and clean. He strung it with the others and turned toward the bank where Lark crouched beside Porter beneath a cottonwood. She held a length of linen over his head to shade his face, whispering something that made him reach for her braid. That's the third one, Colt called, wading toward shore. Lark rose and smiled without ceremony. You'll feed us well tonight. He's got a good eye already, Colt said, nodding toward Porter. Watched every cast like he was memorizing. He watches everything, always has. She took the string of fish from him, careful not to let the line cut her palms. They walked the path back to the cabin slowly, sun warming their backs. Porter balanced on her hip with his cheek against her collarbone. Colt kept pace beside them, basket of wild greens swinging from his hand. Do you ever hire help? She asked after a while. For the planting. I manage alone, mostly, not much to sow, just enough to keep the cellar full. Come haying time, I trade labor with the McClellans east of the ridge. She nodded. I can mend their things if it helps cover our share. You're not in debt to me, I know, she said. But I'd like to earn our place. He didn't answer right away. They reached the clearing and he opened the gate to the yard. The garden plot stood tilled and bare, waiting for seed. He'd planned to do it last week, but hadn't found the time, or maybe he hadn't wanted to spend those hours alone. I'd welcome the help, he said at last, if you're sure you don't mind the dirt. I'm used to it, she said. My father kept a garden behind the livery when I was a girl. Said a person who could grow food from the ground would never go hungry. Colt looked at her hands, the way they held her son steady, the way her fingers curled protectively without thinking. He'd teach you to plant. He taught me not to waste what I had. They reached the porch. Colt lifted the basket to the wash basin and Lark stepped inside with Porter. The door stayed open behind her. Later, as the sun slid low, Lark knelt in the garden with a bag of seed between her knees. Colt dug with the short-handled hoe, carving rows into the dark earth. She followed, pressing seed into the furrows, her fingernails blackened, her hemline mudded. Careful with the spacing, he said without looking up. Too close and they choke each other. I know, she answered. They need room to stretch or they'll wither. You always that way with people too, she straightened, brushing her hair from her brow. Depends who they are, he glanced at her, a faint crease between his brows. And me, do I need space? She tilted her head. I think you're used to it. Doesn't mean you want it. Porter fussed from his blanket on the porch, and she rose to check him, brushing dirt from her palms as she crossed the yard. Colt watched her go, the line of her back strong, her steps sure. She was not a guest anymore. She moved like the cabin belonged to her, like the land knew her name. That night, after the fish had been cleaned and eaten, Colt sat with his boots off, carving again. This time a small figure, a woman's profile, chin lifted, hair tied back. Lark sat across from him, threading a bit of blue calico into a bonnet for Porter. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "Where'd you grow up, Rollins, before it was much of anything? My father came west for rail work and stayed to shoe horses. Your mother died the winter I turned 6. Fever," she paused, eyes on her stitching. I don't remember her voice, only that she sang to herself when she cooked. Colt nodded, not pressing. "I had a sister, older, lost her to a cough that wouldn't quit. War took the rest." Lark looked up. "You were the youngest by a fair stretch." "Didn't know what to do with myself after." She folded the finished bonnet and set it on the table. "You built something, that's more than most manage." He turned the carving in his hand. "Hard to build for no one." She met his eyes. "You're not alone now." The silence that followed held nothing awkward, just the weight of something understood and not yet spoken. Colt stood to stoke the fire, then turned back. "I've got a second plow blade. If you're set on staying through summer, we could make a larger patch." "Trade extra for flour." "I'd like that," she said. Porter stirred from the cradle, half awake. Lark crossed to him, lifted him gently, and held him against her chest. Colt watched her, the way her body curved to protect him, the way her lips rested against his hair. "I'll fix a fence line tomorrow," he said. "Could use your eye, those posts tend to lean when I'm not looking." She smiled faintly, rocking the boy slowly. "I'll be there." The fire crackled low as they settled into quiet. Outside, an owl called from the cottonwoods. Inside, something unspoken settled between them, not rushed, not demanded. Just the slow, steady shaping of a life being built, one day at a time. The rain came slow and steady, soaking the valley in a hush that softened the world. Colt pulled the oilskin tighter around his shoulders and lifted the latch to the chicken coop, checking the feed bin and tossing in a handful of cracked corn. The air smelled of wet earth and pine bark, and the sky hung low with weight. Inside the cabin, Lark moved with a rhythm that had become familiar but never wrote. She stood by the hearth, coaxing warmth from the morning's coals, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Porter sat on a quilt nearby with a wooden spoon, smacking it against a dented tin cup. His laugh came sudden and high, startling the hens outside into nervous clucking. Colt stepped through the door and pushed it shut behind him, stamping mud from his boots. "Fence held through the night," he said, hanging the oilskin on the peg. Lark glanced over her shoulder. "I was half expecting it wouldn't. That north post looked ready to lean. I braced it yesterday with a stone wedge, held better than I thought." She stirred the pot hanging from the hook and lifted the ladle to taste. "If you've got time this week, I'd like to build a drying rack for herbs. There's a patch of yarrow near the creek starting to bloom." He crossed the room, crouched beside Porter, and handed the boy a carved cow from the shelf. "You know what you're doing with that. I've kept my share of remedies. I never called myself a healer, but I know what eases a fever and what doesn't." Colt leaned back against the leg of the table, watching her. "You planning to treat folks from town? Only if they come looking. I'm not fixing to hang a shingle. Just want to have what's needed when it's needed," he nodded. "That rack, I can make it from the old bed frame in the shed. Oak's still good." They didn't speak for a while. The fire snapped, and the smell of barley and onion filled the room. Porter babbled to himself, dragging the cow along the edge of the quilt. Colt stood and poured water into the basin, rinsing his hands. "You ever think of going back to Rollins?" she asked. "To where you were before?" She set the ladle down and wiped her hands on her apron. "No. There's nothing there for me, not anymore. You've got kin anywhere, an aunt in Missouri, but she never wrote after my father passed. I reckon she's gone by now, too." He dried his hands with the cloth hanging by the stove. "You're not looking." "No," she said. "I'm not." Colt stepped closer, resting one hand on the back of the chair. "You know I wouldn't keep you if you wanted to go." "I know," she said, lifting her eyes to his. "But if I stay, it's because I choose to." His throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. "Then I hope you do." She nodded, and something in her face eased like a door had opened inside her, one she hadn't known was locked. Later that day, the rain eased to a fine mist. They worked side by side in the shed, Colt sawing the old oak frame into lengths while Lark sorted through strips of muslin and twine. Porter sat in a basket lined with rags, watching them with wide, solemn eyes. Colt handed Lark a length of wood. "This one'll brace the top." She turned it over in her hands. "You build solid, you always been that way. My father was a carpenter, said if it wobbles, it ain't worth building. He teach you, when I was small, before he took sick." I finished what he started. Lark tied a knot in one end of the muslin. "You ever think about making furniture again?" "I did once, never had someone to make it for." She didn't respond right away. "Then quiet, you do now." Colt met her gaze, and the air between them changed, not sudden, not heavy. Just sure, when the rack was finished and the rain had gone, they stood in the yard beneath a clearing sky. The earth steamed, and the scent of wet grass rose around them. A single robin sang from the fence post. Lark brushed her hand along the grain of the rack. "You think it'll hold? It'll last longer than the cabin if we let it." She turned toward him, face open, nothing guarded in her eyes. "Colt." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I don't need an answer today, just know I want this. What we're building, you, me, Porter," her hand found his. "Then we're building it together." He nodded once, then leaned forward and kissed her, not rushed, not uncertain, just the quiet promise of a man who meant every word he'd spoken. She kissed him back with the same quiet strength. Behind them, Porter gurgled and kicked his feet, his cow forgotten in the grass. They stayed there a while, hands clasped, rain washed earth beneath them, the future unfolding in slow, steady steps. By early August, the wind carried the scent of sun-warmed grass and dry dust off the ridge. The garden had taken root, strong bean shoots curling toward the trellies, squash vines fat with bloom. Lark knelt in the dirt with her skirts pinned at the knee, brushing beetles from the cucumber leaves, while Porter sat on a folded blanket nearby, gnawing the corner of a cornhusk doll Colt had carved him. Colt leaned against the fence post, sleeves rolled, watching them both with a quietness that didn't ask for attention. When Lark straightened and wiped her palms against her apron, she looked his way and narrowed her eyes. "You've been standing there like a crow for 10 minutes, she said. "If you're not going to help, you can fetch me the kettle from the spring." He chuckled and pushed off the post. "I was admiring the rows. You're the only person I've seen get carrots to grow straight in this soil. They grow better when the ground's been turned proper," she said. "Same as most things." He didn't answer that, just tipped a nod and walked toward the spring with the kettle swinging from his hand. That evening, after Porter had fallen asleep curled against the quilt's edge with a knitted sock half off his foot, Lark stepped out onto the porch and found Colt sitting on the top step, pipe in hand, eyes on the last of the sunset. She sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "I heard from the McClellans," he said after a while. "They're looking to sell half their herd come fall." She folded her hands in her lap. "You thinking of buying? Only if I've got reason to grow the place bigger." She looked down at the smooth wood of the porch rail. "You do?" He turned toward her, brows drawn slightly. "Is that you saying you mean to stay?" "I've already stayed," she said. "I've made a home here, not just for Porter, for me." He set the pipe aside and shifted to face her fully. "You've changed this place." "I didn't know how quiet it had gotten until you filled it up again." She reached for his hand. "It's a good quiet now." "I want to marry you, Lark," he said, voice low but sure, "not for duty or because it's what folks expect, because I want every day with you, your stubbornness. Your way of fixing what's broken without asking permission, the way you look at him like he's the sun rising." She didn't answer right away, just pressed her fingers tighter around his, gaze steady. "Yes," she said, "not because I need a name or a ring, but because you see me, all of me." "And I see you." He kissed her then, with the steady warmth of a man who meant to keep his word, and she leaned into it, her hand at his jaw, her breath catching only slightly. They married under the cottonwood near the creek 2 weeks later, with the McClellan boys and their mother standing witness and Porter dressed in a clean shirt too big at the collar. Lark wore a sky blue dress she'd sewn from bolts left in the loft, and pinned her hair back with a bone comb Colt had carved the night before. Afterward, they shared bread and jam and eggs boiled in salt water, and Colt lifted Porter onto his shoulders while Lark watched with a smile that didn't fade. That winter, they sealed the draft in the roof and moved Porter's cradle into the bedroom. Lark grew herbs in the window box and dried them near the stove, while Colt built a second pen behind the barn in preparation for spring calves. They rose early, worked side by side, and laughed over things that once would have gone unnoticed. By Porter's second birthday, the garden had doubled, and a rocking chair sat near the hearth with Lark's embroidery draped over its arm. She carried their second child low and proud, her back straight, her eyes bright. Colt came in from mending the fence, dust in his lashes and his collar unbuttoned. He set his gloves on the table and crossed to her, resting a hand against the curve of her belly. She placed her hand over his and leaned into his chest. "Girl or boy?" he asked. "Doesn't matter," she said. "They'll be home." He kissed her temple, then her mouth, slow and full, the firelight catching the gold in her hair. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, steady and soft. Inside, the room was warm with the scent of stew and wood smoke and the surety of a life built not quickly, but well. They never hung a sign or sent out notice, but word made its way down the valley all the same. That up along the Gros Ventre, there was a place where things grew straight, where a man and a woman raised their children with hands calloused by work and hearts softened by time. And when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the porch, Colt and Lark sat side by side, her head against his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching their children play in the dirt with sticks and laughter and the kind of peace that could never be bought, only earned.